Hi everyone, welcome to the second session of SOC311 SN2 Today we are going to be talking about resources for planning a business. So in this session, the main aim is to look at different types of business entities, to look at what are the different types of business structures and what are some issues that small businesses face. And then we'll also be looking at what are some solutions and resources for that. And last part of the session will be focusing around components of a business plan. So how are we going to use the different components of the business plan, and how do we develop it, how do we include those sections in, and this is kind of tied in with your final assessment for this subject. So let's begin. So with complementary and alternative therapies, we have seen that there has been an increasing rise or a trend, upward trend in the industry growth since the past few years. So there is a lot of statistics and information to suggest that there's lots of profit and there's lots of employment opportunities for complementary and alternative therapists. And some of the factors why the alternative CAM treatments have been on a rise is because people are being more and more aware of the health benefits of using this, the long-term benefits of using complementary treatments, and people are also realizing that they can use it alongside other medications as well. Especially if we look at our aging population, there's been an increased use amongst them because the options that are available to them at that age, or if in case they have gone through a surgery or some other conditions that they are having, most likely that they will be offered palliative care. And that's why they choose to use complementary treatments alongside those treatments offered to them in the general medical setup. So there's increased health consciousness as well, and that's also a factor that has contributed to rise of the CAM treatments. And we probably are aware that most of our industry is made up of individual practitioners, which we can call as sole traders. Sometimes there's also a setup where practitioners are working alongside each other in a multi-modality sort of a clinic, or if they are working together in a partnership. So there are different options available for you as a practitioner to join the workforce as a complementary health therapist. Okay, so what are some factors which you would consider for starting your own business? If you had to think about some advantages and disadvantages of starting your own business, and if you had to write those down, then this is a good snapshot to give you an understanding of what are some of the benefits of it. So if you look at the advantages, it is definitely being able to have your own setup, which gives you self-empowerment. It also provides you the opportunity to heal people, to be a part of the community as an individual practitioner. You also can develop your own network and improve your business skills by networking and communication, or using other professionals as a mentor. It gives you independence, it gives you an increase in your professional profile, and it also gives you an opportunity to have your own leadership skills, or have your own group of people that work as a business entity. Whereas some disadvantages of this may be that there's initially not so much of financial security because of an inconsistent income, and this could be because you are starting out, so maybe you don't have enough experience, and that kind of comes in way of your work as well. It could be stressful also. It's not easy to keep up the motivation level and to keep going in a healthcare business. So focusing on strategies of how you want to grow it is also an important factor that you'd have to consider. Working on some skills that you would want to develop as a practitioner is another area, and so you can sort of underestimate the time that you would be putting in as a business practitioner. and as compared to how much time you'd be actually getting paid for in your clinical setup. So these are some of the disadvantages, and also considering that you may not get enough sick leave or annual leave as such, because you put in a lot of extra time for preparing and for doing everything that goes into establishing your own practice. So we look at the different types of business entities, and this would include a sole trader or a partnership where two people work together, or a company, a trust, or a contractor. So we'd look at all of these different items one by one. So firstly, looking at the sole trader structure. So this business structure is most frequently used, and this is something that's easy to establish because it's just you as a healthcare practitioner who will be involved in the practice, and you can work from any sort of space or place, and you can set up your own sort of clinic. It has less investment as well, so it is a good idea to start off as a sole trader. It's easy to establish, there's not a lot of startup costs involved, and there's also more privacy that you get, or more sort of autonomy that you would get in this type of a setup. Some of the disadvantages of being a sole trader are that you may have limited capacity to get if you had to borrow for the business setup, then you would have a limited capacity to do that. Sometimes financial strains are also one of the disadvantage, and it's also that you would be making most of the decisions, so you wouldn't have someone else to support or to guide you through that process. It's also difficult to go on a holiday or to take time off work because you're the person in charge of your clinic. So these are some of the disadvantages of being a sole practitioner. Whereas in a partnership, it is more likely to be an agreement between two people to do the business together. So if I was to give you an example of a partnership between a nutritionist and let's say someone who is working in the hospitality industry as a chef, or as something like that, that's more like a partnership between two different fields of people who are working together to give nutritional advice, and whereas the other person has more of an expertise of actually making recipes and producing different types of meals. So that is an example that we can think of. Apart from that, you could also think of examples where a massage therapist kind of works in partnership with someone else of a similar modality, like a mouth therapist or a physiotherapist, and that can also be a kind of a partnership where two people bring in different skills but are in a similar type of business structure where they would have similar equipments or products or services offered to their client. So they are appropriate for small businesses, but if there is an agreement that whether the profits or benefits would be shared, so that is one important aspect to consider, that what is the clear agreement of the partnership, and how would the costs be bared, how would the profit be shared, all the credits and losses, etc. should be also calculated for that partnership structure. So if you had to think about some of the advantages and disadvantages of working in a partnership, you can take this time to write that down, think about what could be some advantages and disadvantages, and then we can have a discussion of this. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages. In terms of benefits, you can definitely say that two people having a joint venture, it's easy to have more ideas, it's good to have more input from one another in terms of feedback. There's also low startup costs, there's more access to capital that they can gain as partners, so greater borrowing capacity, and they can have tax savings because the income gets split. So in those areas, it is definitely a good idea. And also, if you, let's say, need a break, if you want to go away for some time, then your partner can be there to handle the business in that time, in that period, and then you can have swap as well. Some of the disadvantages could be that you have a shared liability and you also have a shared profit. So if in case there is a friction or something goes wrong in that agreement, if there are some sort of a misunderstanding or some other concerns that happen, then you would have to consider everything that has to be equally distributed between the two partners. And you need to also be very careful in having all the agreements set up for yourself and the partner. It's also costly to wind up because you would have to give the person authority, and for yourself as well, as to how you would want to split everything up. The next one is a company. So this is a legal entity where there can be limited shares, and this is more likely structure used for bigger businesses. Some of the advantages of being in a company is that you have ease of transferring ownership by selling the shares. There are different shareholders that are involved. There is also a favorable tax return that you can have, and there's a wider capital base. So it's more for a bigger group of organization. Whereas some of the disadvantages is that it's difficult to maintain because there are lots of ongoing costs that are involved. You also need to comply with the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. So there is all the financial affairs which become open to public. They could also be legally more involved, and that's why it is difficult to wind up as a company. So it's more the structure that's taken by bigger organizations who have a bigger capital to put as an investment for the business. So the next which we look at is a trust, which exists when there is one person or a group or an organization that are a legal owner of a property. So this is a more chosen structure for especially when there is a family that's running a business, or in a situation where there is assets that are involved and the family is holding all the assets, or they are liable to run the business and they are also the income beneficiaries. So these are all the factors that are involved when there is a trust or a trustee. So a trustee are the legal custodians of a property, and you would also sometimes see that an organization has different trustees, and that becomes the management committee of an organization, because these trustees are bound to be involved in all the matters for that particular organization. Next up is a contractor. So working as a contractor, which means you pretty much can be in charge of yourself. At the same time, you can be involved in a business organization. So you're pretty much giving your skills to another organization, which is partially or fully operating, and you're a part of it as maybe your own business, or contributing your skills to someone else's business. And this structure is also good for people who want flexible options, who do not want to be completely tied in or bounded by the regulations of that organization, and still being able to give your skills for a limited amount of time or period to the organization. So you can have this as alongside something else, and this works as a good sort of a type of agreement for people who want to have some free time to do something else, or who are pursuing a different role altogether and also working as a contractor alongside. So a small business is a type of structure where there is maybe less staff involved, maybe one or two people who are involved. The financial resources are also limited, and it is most likely independently owned, and it's closely controlled by the person who owns it or is operating it. So the person who's making all the decisions is likely to be one or two people who are the owner of that small business, and that's why there can be a number of advantages and disadvantages, like we spoke about previously, of being in that sort of a setup. There is also a possibility that small businesses slowly and gradually grow and the employees also increase over a period of time. And that's when you have to think about how you can change the structure and make it more inclusive of all the other people that are now involved in this organization, as you are likely to have the obligation or to have ethical responsibilities towards your employees as staff members, and also provide them with access to all the services that are offered in that business group. So now we will be looking at some of the issues that happen in a small business. What are some of the problems or concerns that may take place in that situation? So the determinants of these small businesses are when in terms of behavior of an individual, it's more about the personal objectives, what are the personal goals, also their family considerations, lifestyle factors, other personal attributes that also play a key role in behaviors for small business holders. And issues that affect most likely is the growing revenue. So maintaining it and growing your revenue simultaneously. Sometimes there's economic uncertainty as well. So you have to be very careful with managing cash flow, keeping check on the costs and overheads, keeping a check on what is the competition around you of similar products or services that are offered in the market, and also taxation and compliance. So if it's a small business structure, then you have to still give all the important taxation, file all important documents for the purpose of taxation and compliance. And another really important issue that I would like to emphasize on is there's very little separation of ownership and management. So because there's one person involved in this role, it's very difficult to differentiate between your role as a practitioner and also keeping track of all the other tasks in the business. So you tend to spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and energy into doing everything, and that can sometimes make a person feel run down or overwhelmed a little bit. It's also about, having that differentiation between personal assets and business assets or business sort of liabilities. So you have to set yourself very clear guidelines and very clear standards of what you want the business to achieve and how do you want to do it, and separate that from your personal goals and personal assets or liabilities as well. So what could be some solutions and resources that we can use as a small business holder? So these are some different options that we will be looking at. Many people these days find it convenient to run a home-based business, especially if you are a fresh graduate as a naturopath or nutritionist or whatever your modality is. If you don't want to put in a huge investment cost or a huge financial cost towards your practice, then home business provides that answer or solution for doing what you're passionate about, running it from home, not having to spend a lot of money on it, and also having the flexibility to work around your family. So if you're thinking of starting a home-based business, you can maximize your success by understanding what are the risks of a small home-based business, or what are the requirements for you to do that. So you are still required to have your taxes done, and it is also a requirement that you show that employment with the proper guidelines. You have to set aside your finances for, even if it's a home-based business, there will be still some cost involved for, let's say, the use of the products that you had to offer your customers, and also other financial costs that are associated with it. Insurance is also another important factor to consider. Sometimes if you're running a home-based business, you may be able to claim certain things on your tax as well, just because you are using utilities such as internet connection or electricity or other such utilities for your business. You also need to check what is the council approval, because sometimes when you're advertising at a home-based business, there's only a limited amount of advertising that you can do. So make sure that what are the guidelines, and you have a good understanding of those guidelines in that local area, in the local council, and all the licensing requirements that also apply in a home-based business. So questions that you can consider is that if your home location is the best place to start a business, if you want to contact the local council, if you want to, you'll have to check what the regulations are and what type of business can you do under that regulation. What are your other legal obligations for a home-based business? Is it a good option for you to give you that flexibility and balance your work and family life? And if there's any other requirement that you need to check on. Other factors that may impact on it is because it's a residential area, you would have to consider the noise pollution levels, you would have to consider parking and any other special permits that you may require. If there's any damages that are involved, again, that is a risk factor for a home-based business. So check all the requirements before you narrow down your options for which type of business structure you want to go ahead with. If you're sharing a practice in a multimodality center, that is also a very popular option these days. So think about questions such as what is the need in sharing a practice? So what are the things that you will require to do that? If you will need another person to join you, or if that practice needs a practitioner, what is their criteria? How will you generate your own client bookings and advertise your practice? And what sort of target population are you going to be looking at? That is also another really important factor to consider when you are sharing a practice. And if you're buying an established practice, that also has certain advantages and disadvantages. So some of the advantages would be that you will have immediate cash flow because it is an already set up practice with practitioners and a client base. So all you have to really do is transfer it onto your name, and it can still be run in the same way, except if there are any changes that you would like to make as a new owner of the established practice. And some disadvantages could be that if it's developed by someone else and you don't have a lot of awareness of how they have run it, you may change a few things around, and that's why the existing clients may not have the same experience, or you may not be able to retain them because of certain factors. So think about have a good understanding of what is the established practice that you are buying or that you are trying to be involved in, and then that would give you a good idea of how would you maintain your clients as well. So a little checklist that you can have a look at is, why is the business being sold? You can ask the person who is interested in selling it if there's any policies and procedures that you need to be aware of, any other new developments in the area, any other need for goodwill, and also the advertising and all also may change depending on what the business logo is or the trademark is, because all these are the person or the existing owner's IP, which needs to be then changed onto your particular needs and business structure. Also look for signs of financial, if there's any disturbance, if there's any difficulty that the business is going through. So make sure that you have everything checked before you go ahead with that option. Another really interesting one is leasing a room, which practitioners find very interesting and even convenient, because when you are leasing a room, there's less liability as such, and it is more of just setting up your practice in a particular space where you'd be able to do it in your way, and you have an agreement with the owner of the property to be able to provide certain services and offer certain products in there. So also again look at what are the requirements when you are taking a space for lease and what sort of regulations you'd have to follow as a practitioner. It is always important to have a good communication with whoever you are liaising with, whether it is an owner where you are setting up your practice as a tenant, or whether you are working in another commercial space along with other practitioners. When you have good communications and when you have set up what your standards and expectations are, then it becomes easy for other people to work together, and you can make the most of the space that you are using cordially with other practitioners as well. So with commercial leases, again, this is when you are, let's say, leasing your own premise or even looking for a place to start up your practice. So look at all the factors, look at what are the renewal options and how long would you be getting the lease for, or whether it's been transferred on to you, and if there's any other specifications that you also need to consider in that situation. So when you have to effectively manage your business, it does require a lot of other factors apart from what your practitioner skills are. And this can include being proactive, being able to implement strategies effectively, also keeping a check on your expenses and on your accounts, and being accountable for whatever decisions that you take legally, and also all the regulatory and ethical responsibilities as a practitioner, and trying to constantly improve yourself and involve yourself in customer service and meeting the needs of the client, which can be very diverse sometimes, and it can also be very time consuming for you to put in that much of time and energy in that therapeutic relationship where you have to build their trust, but over a period you would be able to get that sort of a client response when you have the experience and when you're able to clearly see your goals as to how you want to set up and grow your business. So monitoring your progress is another crucial step, and this includes making changes when necessary, developing leadership skills, and regularly reviewing or monitoring your service. Also developing different marketing strategies which may be necessary for ongoing progress, and we will discuss this in detail in another session. So you can look at some good useful links over here, and just click on them, have a browse through the different links, see what you find, see what you think is suitable to you from whatever we've discussed in the previous slides. I want you all to think about which type of business setting you think is a really good option for you that you would want to utilize, and how would you be able to do that or incorporate it with your current skill set. So this is another little activity. Which business structure you would want to consider to incorporate, why, what are the ongoing costs or tax implications or liabilities that you have to be aware of, and think about some advantages and disadvantages of these. So give yourself some time to complete this activity, write down your answers, feel free to share it in the discussion forum as well, and I will see you in the second part of this session.